What if I told you there is a single verse in the Bible so powerful that kings feared it, nations clung to it, and martyrs whispered it with their dying breath? A verse that does not promise safety after the storm, but strength inside the fire. This is not poetry. It is a secret survival code hidden in Psalm 46, a verse that can tear down fear and rebuild courage in the ruins of chaos. Tonight we are not reading an ancient hymn, we are opening a fortress, and once you step inside, you may never see God the same way again. This is the journey into Psalm 46, and the most powerful verse I have ever learned from it. Chapter 1, The Fortress in the Storm. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Psalm 46 opens with a thunderclap, a declaration as bold as the roar of the sea. This is not gentle poetry. It is a battle cry carved into the stones of history, whispered by trembling lips in the darkest of nights. The psalmist is not describing God as a mere shelter, a quiet hut where one hides in fear. No. The word refuge here is more akin to a fortress, an unshakable citadel rising above the storm. Imagine standing on a windswept plain, lightning splitting the sky, the ground trembling under your feet. Before you rises an ancient stronghold, its walls towering, unbreakable, its gates sealed against the chaos outside. That is the image Psalm 46:1 paints, God as a fortress in the storm. Not a place of escape, but a place of absolute safety. But there is more. The verse does not only speak of protection, it speaks of strength. A fortress may shield you, but it cannot refill your weary soul. Yet the psalmist insists that God is not only where you hide, but where you are renewed. Refuge and strength, two sides of the same mystery. The first keeps you alive, the second makes you powerful again. In the book of Daniel, 3 young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were thrown into a blazing furnace for refusing to bow to a king's idol. They were not rescued before the fire was lit. They were not spared from the punishment. Instead, the miracle was that God himself entered the fire with them. The king looked and saw a fourth figure walking in the flames, one like the son of the gods. God did not build them a fortress of stone, but he became their fortress in the storm. God is not merely a protector who keeps trouble far away. He is a very present help in trouble. The Hebrew here emphasizes immediacy. He is right there, right now, at the moment of crisis. Not tomorrow, not eventually. He enters the furnace. He descends into the storm. He steps into the chaos at the very moment we think we cannot endure another second. How many times have we mistaken God's presence because we expected him to remove the fire, when his promise was to stand with us inside it? We pray for escape, but Psalm 46 promises something different: divine company in the worst of it. That is why martyrs sang at their execution. That is why the persecuted whispered prayers behind prison bars. They were not abandoned. They were strengthened. In a world where kingdoms rise and fall, where nature itself can shake the earth, the psalmist dares to say that one thing does not change: God as fortress, God as strength, God as immediate help. This is not naive optimism. It is not denial of reality. The psalmist sees the storm clearly, but he sees something greater behind it. The imagery of a fortress also challenges us. A fortress is not built overnight. It stands as the result of generations, carved into rock, designed to withstand centuries of siege. In the same way, trust in God is not flimsy emotion. It is a foundation forged through trials. When we declare him our refuge, we are not speaking of temporary comfort. We are placing our faith in something older than empires, stronger than armies, more permanent than mountains. Yet the verse continues to unsettle us. If God is truly this fortress, if he is the unshakable stronghold, then why does the psalmist go on to describe earthquakes, mountains collapsing into the sea, and chaos overwhelming the world? Why depict such terrifying destruction if safety is guaranteed? Perhaps the psalmist knew what we are often afraid to admit. Faith is not the absence of disaster. faith is the defiance of fear in the middle of disaster. God as fortress does not mean the storm will never rage. It means the storm will never have the final word. The walls will hold, the strength will endure. And so, chapter 1 closes with a paradox that refuses to be simplified. God is our refuge and strength, but not by sparing us from the storm. He is our fortress precisely when the storm is most violent. He is our strength precisely when we are most broken. He is very present help precisely when we feel most alone. The psalm begins with this audacious claim, daring us to believe that divine protection is not about escaping reality, but about encountering a reality greater than our fear. The fortress is real, the strength is real, the help is immediate, but the chaos is real too. And that leaves us with a haunting question that demands to be answered. If God is our fortress, why does the psalmist still speak of earthquakes and collapsing mountains? Chapter 2, when the world falls apart. The psalmist does not paint a picture of calm skies after declaring God our refuge. Instead, he thrusts us into chaos. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. This is no gentle metaphor. This is apocalyptic imagery. The very ground beneath our feet, that which we trust to remain immovable, suddenly collapses. Mountains, the symbols of permanence, are hurled into the ocean. The sea, in biblical thought, is not a calm paradise but the place of chaos, the abyss of untamed darkness. And here, in Psalm 46, the mountains crash into that abyss. Creation itself unravels before our eyes. The psalmist forces us to confront the unthinkable. What happens when the world itself falls apart? It is one thing to trust God when the storm passes quickly. It is another when the storm dismantles everything familiar, when the very structures of your life, your health, your security, your family, your nation, collapse into the sea. And yet, the voice of the psalmist rises defiantly. We will not fear. It is not the absence of danger that produces this statement. It is the presence of God. The faith here is not natural, not logical, not something any human could muster on their own. This is supernatural defiance. Faith that stares into the abyss and refuses to bow. Earthquakes, floods, mountains breaking apart, these are not personal inconveniences. They are existential threats. Everything in the human heart would cry out in terror. And yet the psalmist insists on fearlessness. How? Because when the foundations of the earth shake, there remains one foundation that cannot be moved. The same God who was described in verse 1 as a fortress and strength is now revealed as the only stability when creation itself is undone. Isaiah 41:10 echoes this promise centuries later. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, I will help you, I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Notice again, God does not promise a world without earthquakes or seas without roaring. He promises his presence in the middle of them. The antidote to fear is not control over circumstances, but communion with God. And history again offers us flesh and blood witnesses of this truth. In the late 19th century, Horatio Spafford was a man crushed by tragedy. After losing much of his fortune in the Chicago fire of 1871, he faced an even greater blow. His 4 daughters drowned in a shipwreck while crossing the Atlantic. Only his wife survived. Most people would have collapsed under such grief, their faith shattered by the violence of life. But in the wake of this disaster, while crossing the same waters that swallowed his children, Spafford wrote words that would echo across generations. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. Do you see the paradox? The psalmist spoke of seas roaring and mountains quaking. Spafford experienced those seas in the form of personal loss. Yet in both, the refrain is the same: we will not fear. Not because the pain was small, not because the danger was imaginary, but because God's presence was larger than the storm. This is the unsettling twist Psalm 46 confronts us with. The world can and will fall apart. Faith is not pretending it won't. Faith is staring at the crumbling earth and finding a fortress that does not move. Faith is not silence before the storm. It is defiance within the storm. And this defiance is not rooted in human resilience. Human strength eventually breaks, but divine presence sustains when nothing else can. That is why the psalmist, instead of describing survival strategies or escape plans, simply declares, "Therefore, we will not fear." He is not depending on himself, he is depending on the God who cannot be shaken. What are the mountains in our lives? What are the unshakable things we have trusted that if they were to collapse, we would think the world had ended? Perhaps it is health, perhaps it is wealth, perhaps it is the illusion of safety. The psalmist calls us to face even the collapse of these and declare, "We will not fear." What is the secret source of this unearthly peace? How can one look at chaos and sing, "It is well with my soul"? The psalmist does not leave us in the dark. He whispers of something hidden, something flowing beneath the surface, something that sustains the city of God when everything else crumbles. It is a river unlike the roaring seas of chaos, a river of gladness, life, and peace, a river that never dries because its source is God Himself. If the world can collapse and yet peace remains, then the key must be found in this mysterious river. But what is it? Where does it flow? And why is it the secret that chaos can never touch? That is the mystery awaiting us in the next chapter. Chapter 3. The Hidden River of Joy. After the roaring seas and collapsing mountains of verses 2 and 3, Psalm 46 takes a dramatic and almost shocking turn. Suddenly the imagery shifts. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. Do you see the contrast? Just moments ago, the psalmist described chaos, oceans raging, mountains disintegrating. Now he introduces a river, gentle yet powerful, calm yet life-giving. This is not the sea of destruction. This is the river of joy. And in the Bible, rivers are never accidental. They are symbols of divine provision, channels of eternal life, reminders of God's sustaining presence. In Genesis 2, before sin entered the world, before humanity ever knew death, a river flowed out of Eden to water the garden. That river was not just geography, it was theology. It declared that life came directly from God's presence. Then centuries later, the prophet Ezekiel saw a vision of a river flowing from the temple of God. At first it was ankle-deep, then knee-deep, then so vast it could not be crossed. Wherever the river flowed, life sprang up. Dead seas were healed. Trees bore fruit in every season. And in the final book of the Bible, Revelation 22, John sees the river of the water of life flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. On its banks grows the tree of life, whose leaves bring healing to the nations. This river is a golden thread that runs through all of Scripture, from Eden lost, to Eden restored, to Eden eternal. And Psalm 46 places it right in the heart of God's city. Ancient cities depended on rivers for survival. Babylon had the Euphrates, Egypt had the Nile, yet Jerusalem, the city of God, had no river. Its water came from springs and aqueducts, but no great river ran through it. Why then does the psalmist describe a river in the city of God? The answer is clear. He is not speaking of geography, but theology. The river is not literal water. It is the stream of God's presence. It is the invisible current of divine joy that sustains His people even when the earth shakes and seas roar. Seas roar in rage, but this river whispers in peace. Mountains collapse, but this stream quietly strengthens. Nations tremble, but this river makes the city glad. It is not external security that protects God's people, but internal presence. That is why the psalmist declares, "God is in the midst of her, she shall not be moved." We often think peace depends on circumstances, when problems end, when battles cease, when life finally stabilizes. But Psalm 46 teaches the opposite. True peace is not the absence of chaos, but the presence of God. The city of God is unshaken, not because it has no enemies, but because the river of divine presence flows within it. How many of us have sought peace by trying to control our circumstances? We rearrange our schedules, we manage our finances, we secure our homes, we build walls around our hearts. Yet despite all our efforts, fear still finds us. The psalmist reveals why. Peace cannot be engineered from the outside. It must be received from within, from the river that flows where God dwells. And notice the timing in verse 5. God will help her when morning dawns. The image here is striking. Night represents darkness, danger, the threat of annihilation. But morning always comes. The God who sustains his people through the night is the God who brings deliverance with the dawn. Think of the Israelites at the Red Sea, trapped between Pharaoh's army and the waters. They waited through the night, and in the morning, God split the sea. Think of the resurrection. The disciples mourned in despair, but at dawn on the third day, the stone was rolled away. Morning always comes. The river, then, is not only about presence, but about promise. It assures us that no matter how long the night, help is coming. No matter how fierce the storm, joy is flowing. No matter how impossible the circumstances, the presence of God guarantees a dawn of deliverance. This river challenges us to reimagine our faith. Are we chasing stability in the seas of the world, which rise and fall unpredictably? Or are we rooted in the quiet, constant river of God's presence? One rages with chaos, the other flows with life. And yet, the psalmist is not naive. He knows peace is not uncontested. Even as the river flows, nations rage and kingdoms totter. The fortress city of God is not ignored by the powers of the earth. They gather against it. They roar at its gates, which brings us to the next chapter, where the psalmist asks the question that has haunted history. What happens when nations rise against the city of God? Chapter 4, When Nations Rage. The psalmist has shown us mountains crumbling, seas roaring, and then a mysterious river of peace flowing through the city of God. But peace is not the end of the story. There is another threat, one even more terrifying than natural disaster. The nations raged, the kingdoms were moved. He uttered his voice, the earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Empires rising like storms, armies marching with banners high, the clash of iron echoing across valleys, the roar of battle shaking the earth. Kingdom against kingdom, ruler against ruler, war drums pounding in defiance of heaven. The psalmist captures the violent heartbeat of history. Human nations rage, human kingdoms crumble. This is not just poetry, it is history itself. From the Tower of Babel to the fall of Rome, from Babylon to modern wars, the story of humanity is the story of nations raging. Every empire boasts of permanence, but sooner or later every throne trembles. The psalmist does not sugarcoat it. He stares into the bloody reality of politics, power, and war. And yet in one breathtaking moment he reveals something shocking. All it takes is a single word from God, and the earth itself melts into silence. Human rulers plot wars for decades. Armies prepare for years. Battles rage for days. But God speaks once, just once, and all the noise collapses. The clash of swords, the cries of soldiers, the shouts of kings, all swallowed up in one divine utterance. What no treaty, no army, no peacekeeper has ever accomplished, God does with his voice. God's sovereignty is not contested. Human beings may rage, but heaven is not shaken. The nations roar, but the fortress of God still stands. Empires rise and fall on his command. The psalmist reminds us that history is not spinning out of control. It is under the authority of the one who speaks worlds into being and can silence them in an instant. But here comes the twist, and it is more personal than we expect. The psalmist names him the Lord of hosts, Yahweh Sabaoth, the commander of heaven's armies, the general of countless angelic warriors. This title evokes awe and terror. He is the supreme commander whose forces cannot be numbered, who directs the armies of light against the forces of darkness. Yet in the same breath, the psalmist calls him the God of Jacob. Do you see the contrast? The cosmic commander of angelic hosts, the terrifying Lord of armies, is also the God of one man, Jacob, a flawed, struggling, deceiving, limping patriarch. The psalmist wants us to feel the tension. The God who commands galaxies is also the God who stoops down to walk with the weak. The one who thunders over nations also whispers to the broken. The fortress of the universe is also the shelter for a single trembling soul. This dual identity is the heart of the gospel hidden in the psalm. God is not so distant in his power that he ignores our frailty, nor is he so personal in his compassion that he forfeits his authority. He is both, the ruler of all creation and the refuge of the weakest believer. When nations rage and kingdoms totter, when global crises threaten to drown us, we are not abandoned to chance. The same God who commands armies of heaven is the God who knows your name. The same voice that melts the earth is the voice that says, "Fear not, for I am with you." Nations have risen with fury. Assyria, Babylon, Rome, countless empires since. All believed themselves indestructible. All raged against God's people, and all in time fell. But the people of God remained, not because they had stronger armies, but because they had a stronger refuge. When the dust of history settles, the Lord of hosts still reigns, and the God of Jacob still shelters his children. And so the psalmist's refrain returns like a thunderous chorus. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. This is not mere repetition. It is a proclamation of defiance against every empire, every tyrant, every raging nation. It is the ancient believer's way of saying, your armies may march, your kingdoms may shake, but our fortress will never fall. Yet this raises the haunting question that leads us to the next revelation. If God commands heaven's armies, if one word from his mouth silences nations, then what happens when he decides not only to still the storm of nature, but to end the war of man itself? What happens when the commander of heaven chooses to dismantle the very machinery of human conflict? When the God of Jacob, the Lord of hosts, stretches out his hand, and war itself comes to an end. Chapter 5. The End of War. The psalmist now shifts from describing to commanding. The voice changes from observation to invitation. Come, behold the works of the Lord. It is as if he is drawing us by the hand, pulling us to the edge of history itself, saying, look, see with your own eyes, witness what God has done. And what do we behold? The battlefield after God is moved. Spears snapped like twigs, bows broken in half, chariots once roaring with fire now reduced to smoldering ash. The weapons of human arrogance, symbols of power and conquest, lie useless on the ground. This is not the aftermath of a human treaty, fragile and temporary. This is the decisive hand of the Almighty dismantling the machinery of war itself. It is one of the most dramatic scenes in all of Scripture. The God who commands the stars also intervenes in the affairs of nations. He does not merely watch from heaven as kings fight for dominance, he acts. And when he acts, he brings an end to violence not by negotiation, but by annihilation of the very tools that sustain it. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Notice the verbs. He makes wars cease. He breaks. He shatters. He burns. These are not passive descriptions. They are active judgments. God is not neutral. He is the divine warrior who destroys the engines of human cruelty. We see glimpses of this throughout history. Think back to the Exodus. Pharaoh's army thundered after Israel with horses, chariots, and weapons gleaming in the desert sun. To human eyes, it was hopeless. The sea ahead, the army behind, a trap with no escape. Yet at the command of God, the waters parted, his people crossed, and when the chariots pursued, the sea swallowed them whole. The greatest military force of the ancient world drowned in a single night. Bows broken, spears shattered, chariots burned beneath the waves. Or consider the story of Gideon. With only 300 men armed with nothing but trumpets, jars, and torches, he faced the massive Midianite army. How could such weakness prevail? Yet God caused confusion in the enemy camp, and the soldiers turned their swords on one another. Again, the weapons of men proved useless before the purposes of God. The psalmist's invitation is clear. Come, behold. He does not ask us to imagine. He asks us to look at the record of history, at the mighty works already done, as proof that the same God still reigns. If he ended wars before, he can do it again. Psalm 46 does not merely celebrate the end of external wars. It whispers of another war, one fought within the human heart. The breaking of bows and shattering of spears are not only about nations, but about souls. How many of us live in constant inner warfare? The war of anxiety, the war of guilt, the war of anger that rages silently within. We may not wield literal spears, but our words can cut deeper than iron. Our thoughts can torment us more than any army. And into this chaos, the same God enters, breaking weapons not of steel but of bitterness. He burns the chariots of pride. He shatters the strategies of fear. He makes wars cease not just at the borders of nations but in the secret chambers of the heart. This is why the psalm remains timeless. It is not merely political commentary, it is personal revelation. God does not just dismantle empires. He dismantles our inner conflicts, giving peace where there was once strife, joy where there was once despair, forgiveness where there was once guilt. And yet, the invitation remains urgent. Come, behold. In other words, do not look away. We live in a world addicted to war, outwardly and inwardly. To behold the works of the Lord is to acknowledge that only He can end it. No king, no treaty, no self-help technique can bring the peace we crave. Only the God who breaks and shatters and burns can. And so the psalmist pulls us close, his words heavy with mystery. The nations rage, God speaks, and the battlefield grows silent. But then, in the next verse, the voice changes again. It is no longer addressed to the nations. It is no longer directed at the armies of the earth. Suddenly, the voice of God Himself speaks directly to you. And what He says is not what you expect. Chapter 6. Be still. After the roar of nations and the crash of armies, the psalm suddenly shifts. The battlefield is silent. Smoke rises from broken weapons. And then, a voice speaks. It is not the psalmist's voice. It is not the voice of kings or prophets. It is the voice of God Himself. Be still and know that I am God. This single sentence thunders louder than all the wars of history. It is both a command and a comfort, a rebuke and an invitation. In Hebrew, the phrase "be still" literally means cease striving, let go, relax your grip. It is the language of surrender. Stop your frantic struggling. Stop trying to control the uncontrollable. Stop believing that your power can hold back the flood. Let go and know. But notice the order. We do not begin with knowledge and then learn stillness. We begin with stillness, and in the silence we discover who God truly is. In other words, you cannot know that He is God until you first release your desperate need to be God over your own life. After all the chaos, the earthquake, the raging sea, the war of nations, the broken chariots, God does not shout instructions on how to rebuild. He does not offer strategies for survival. He simply says, "Be still." Because the real battle is not outside us, it is within us. The war of fear, the siege of anxiety, the rebellion of self-reliance. And it is only won when we surrender. Think of Exodus 14:14. The Israelites, freshly freed from Egypt, stood trapped between Pharaoh's army and the Red Sea. Panic rose, the people cried out, and Moses answered them with words that echo the heartbeat of Psalm 46. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Stillness is not laziness. It is not passivity. It is an act of radical trust. It is saying, I will not panic, I will not grasp, I will not manipulate, I will trust the one who fights on my behalf. But stillness is not easy. Our modern world despises it. We are conditioned to act, to fix, to solve. We measure worth by productivity, not surrender. And yet the psalm calls us to stop, to sit, to recognize that our strength is not enough, but his presence is. Jesus himself demonstrated this truth in the story of Mary and Martha. Martha busied herself with serving, anxious and distracted. Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening. Martha was frustrated. Shouldn't doing be more important than sitting? But Jesus' response was clear. Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken from her. The better part was stillness in the presence of God. Stillness is not weakness. Stillness is power. It is the posture of those who know that the God who shattered Pharaoh's chariots and silenced raging nations is the same God who now whispers peace into the heart. Stillness is the key that unlocks divine strength. How can stillness conquer fear when chaos still surrounds us? How can a quiet heart resist the roar of collapsing worlds? The psalm provides the answer in the second half of verse 10. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. Do you see it? Stillness is not based on the illusion that everything is fine. Stillness is anchored in the certainty that God will be exalted no matter what. Nations may rage, seas may roar, but God's glory will rise above them all. To be still is to align yourself with the ultimate outcome of history. It is to say, though I cannot control the present, I know the end. God will be exalted, and that is enough. This is why martyrs went to their deaths singing hymns. This is why persecuted believers could endure prison with joy. They were still not because the chaos disappeared, but because they had glimpsed the exaltation of God beyond the chaos. And so, Psalm 46 calls us to a stillness that is active faith. A stillness that confronts fear, not by ignoring it, but by anchoring in a greater reality. A stillness that whispers, the storm is loud, but my God is louder. The nations rage, but my refuge remains. But the psalm is not finished. After the command to be still comes the final declaration, a refrain that has echoed from the lips of believers across centuries. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. It is here in this refrain that the psalmist ties the story together. What does it truly mean for the Lord of hosts to be with us? If the God of Jacob is our refuge, how does that reality transform our daily lives? That is the question that waits for us in the next chapter. Chapter 7, the God of history and the God of me. The psalm closes with a refrain that has echoed like a drumbeat throughout its verses. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. It is both the conclusion and the climax, the final thunder after the storm. But to grasp its weight, we must look closely at the two names used, the Lord of hosts and the God of Jacob. Together they form the paradox at the heart of faith. On one side stands the Lord of hosts. This is the title of the cosmic commander. Hosts here means armies, legions, the countless ranks of angelic beings under his command. Imagine the night sky filled not with stars but with soldiers of light, stretching beyond imagination, waiting for his word. This is the Lord of hosts, the general of heaven, the sovereign over galaxies, the one before whom nations rise and fall like sandcastles against the tide. He is terrifying in majesty, overwhelming in power, unchallenged in authority. But on the other side stands the God of Jacob. Not Abraham, the father of nations, not Moses, the great deliverer, not David, the conquering king. Jacob, the deceiver, the struggler, the man who limped after wrestling with God. To call him the God of Jacob is to say he is not ashamed to be identified with the weak, the flawed, the broken. He is the God who binds himself to fragile humanity. The commander of armies is also the companion of sinners. The Lord of hosts is with us, the unshakable fortress of the universe, and the God of Jacob is our refuge, the intimate friend of the weak. He is both vast and near, both terrifying and tender. The Exodus offers a living picture of this paradox. As Israel marched through the wilderness, they were guided not by maps or compasses, but by presence. A pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night, fire blazing against the dark sky, cloud shading against the desert sun. These were not mere symbols. They were signs that the Lord of hosts walked with his people step by step. He who ruled the heavens stooped to guide their every camp, their every journey. He was the God of history leading an entire nation, and the God of each individual who looked up at night and saw the glow of his fire. And it is here that the psalmist's refrain becomes personal. The Lord of hosts is not only with us collectively, he is with me individually. The God of Jacob is not only the refuge of a people, he is my refuge. The psalm is not a theological essay, it is a lifeline. It is the voice of a believer declaring, "The one who governs stars is also the one who calms my soul." This is where Philippians 4:7 connects so powerfully. "And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Peace that surpasses understanding, a fortress not of stone but of presence, a guard not of soldiers but of divine peace standing watch over your heart. That is the God of history becoming the God of me. And yet, there is a challenge hidden here. Many of us accept God as the Lord of history, abstract and distant, but struggle to believe he is the God of me, near and personal. We see him as powerful enough to move nations, but doubt he cares enough to heal our wounds. Psalm 46 dismantles that doubt. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. The cosmic and the personal are inseparable. The same voice that melts the earth with a word is the voice that whispers your name. The same presence that guided Israel with fire is the presence that fills your living room, your hospital bed, your darkest night. The same power that brought empires to their knees is the power that holds your trembling hand. This is the secret I discovered, the truth that rewrote my own fears. When I finally saw that the God of galaxies was also the God of Jacob, the God of me, my panic lost its grip. The storms of life did not vanish, the battles did not disappear, but suddenly the fortress was not just above me, it was around me, within me. His peace, that surpasses understanding, became the guard at the gate of my heart. The psalmist leaves us with this refrain not as repetition, but as revelation. He repeats it because it must sink deep. We are not alone. We are not abandoned. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. But this truth leads to the next mystery. If this verse can rewrite fear itself, if it can transform chaos into peace, what happens when we allow it to shape our entire story? What happens when we live as though the God of history is truly the God of me? That is the revelation waiting in the next chapter. Chapter 8. My encounter with refuge. Up until now, Psalm 46 may have sounded like an ancient anthem, a collective confession, a story about nations and armies and rivers that flow through eternity. But for me, the turning point came when those words leapt off the page and into my own crisis. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. I had read it many times before, but one moment in my life forced me to test whether those words were poetry or reality. It was a season when everything I had trusted began to collapse. Plans failed, relationships fractured. The security I had carefully built crumbled like sand in a storm. On the outside, I kept moving, but on the inside, I was unraveling. That's when Psalm 46 came alive. At first, I clung to the verse the way a drowning person clings to driftwood. I wanted refuge to mean escape, a way out of the storm. I prayed for God to erase the chaos, to silence the trouble, to rebuild my walls. But nothing shifted, at least not on the outside. The circumstances remained. The storm did not stop. And it was then that I realized I had misunderstood refuge. Refuge is not simply a hiding place where you wait for danger to pass. Refuge is not a cave where you shrink back in fear. Refuge in Psalm 46 is a fortress, and a fortress is not built for escape, it is built for strength. Inside its walls, warriors rest, recover, and rise again. Refuge is not retreat, it is renewal. God was not inviting me to run away from the storm. He was inviting me to find strength within it. Refuge meant I could collapse in His presence, lay down the weapons of my own control, and discover a strength that was not mine but His. It was not about survival, it was about transformation. The wave peak of this encounter came when I finally admitted my weakness. I had been fighting to stay strong, holding my breath, pretending I could manage it. But when I whispered, "I can't do this," I felt a quiet power rise that was not my own. It was as if the fortress walls closed around me, and suddenly I was not holding myself up anymore. The verse had become flesh in my life. Refuge was not escape. Refuge was resurrection. I am not telling this as theory. I am telling it as testimony. My encounter with Psalm 46:1 was not a theological exercise, but a lived reality. I discovered that the fortress is real because I stood inside it. I discovered that the strength is real because it filled me when I had none. The words are true because they held me. When you hear God is our refuge and strength, do not imagine ancient walls on distant hills. Imagine your own crisis, your own collapse, your own furnace, and then picture God standing in the middle of it with you. That is what I experienced, and that is why I cannot read this psalm as poetry anymore. It is survival, it is life, it is promise. And yet, as personal as this verse became, I could not shake the sense that it pointed beyond me. Yes, it was a refuge in my crisis. Yes, it was strength in my weakness. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized that this verse also whispers of something cosmic, something prophetic. It is not only about my storm, it is about the storm of history. Because if God is refuge now, then He will be refuge at the end. If He is strength in personal chaos, then He will be strength when the world itself unravels. The psalm that sustained me in my darkest night also seems to hold a hidden prophecy for the end of days. It speaks of mountains falling, seas roaring, nations raging. It is not just the story of my crisis. It is the story of humanity's final hour. And so my personal encounter became a doorway into a larger mystery. The fortress that sheltered me is the same fortress that will stand when kingdoms collapse. The strength that revived me is the same strength that will carry the faithful through the world's last upheaval. This psalm is not only history and not only personal testimony, it is also prophecy. And the verse that rewrote my fears may also be the verse that unveils the future. But what does that prophecy look like? What if Psalm 46 is not just a comfort for today, but a warning of tomorrow? Chapter 9, the prophetic dimension. Until now, Psalm 46 has spoken into the personal storm, into the chaos of nations, into the hidden river of peace. But the language of this psalm reaches further. Its imagery of earthquakes, collapsing mountains, roaring seas, and raging nations is not just poetry, it is prophecy. It is a preview of what Scripture elsewhere calls the day of the Lord. The great tribulation that will shake heaven and earth before God establishes His unshakable kingdom. The psalmist describes the earth giving way, the mountains falling into the sea, the waters roaring and foaming. These are the very pictures echoed centuries later in the prophets in the New Testament. Isaiah 24 speaks of the earth utterly broken and violently shaken. Jesus in Matthew 24 warns of wars and rumors of wars, of nations rising against nations, and of natural upheavals that will mark the end. Revelation 6 shows mountains removed from their places, the sea roaring with judgment, kings and rulers hiding in caves. Psalm 46 anticipates them all, a mini-apocalypse hidden in the heart of the Old Testament. And yet, in this storm of prophecy, the psalmist dares to proclaim, "We will not fear." Why? Because God is still our refuge and strength. Psalm 46 is not only a comfort for small personal crises, it is a survival code for the end of days. It teaches us how to stand when the whole world falls apart. Psalm 46 is not only history, not only poetry, but apocalypse. It is a miniature revelation, a glimpse of the final shaking of creation. And right in the middle of that shaking, the psalmist sees something astonishing, a river. In the prophetic dimension, the the river is more than a metaphor for God's presence in the present. It is a symbol of eternal life in the kingdom to come. Revelation 22 makes this clear. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. This river is not threatened by chaos. It flows after chaos is destroyed. It nourishes the tree of life, whose leaves bring healing to the nations. It is the final answer to the raging seas and the wars of the world. What does this mean for us? It means that Psalm 46 is not just about surviving storms now. It is about aligning with a destiny that stretches into eternity. The river of God promises not only present peace, but future restoration. The fortress is not only for this life, but for the age to come. The God who is a very present help in trouble is also the God who will wipe away every tear, silence every war, and reign forever in the city where no enemy can enter. Before the river flows in glory, the world must shake. Before the eternal city shines, the nations rage. The psalm reminds us that chaos precedes redemption. The shaking is not random, it is preparation. God allows the mountains to fall and the nations to totter so that every false foundation is exposed. What cannot be shaken will remain. And so, when we read Psalm 46 in prophetic light, we realize it is not just comfort literature. It is training. It is God's way of preparing His people to endure the great shaking that precedes His final victory. The courage to say, "We will not fear" in today's crises is the same courage that will sustain believers in the last days. The river that strengthens us now will carry us then into eternal joy. Psalm 46, written in an age of kings and wars, secretly contains a vision of the end of history. It compresses the apocalypse into 11 verses, and in doing so, it whispers to us that survival is not the final goal. Survival without destiny is meaningless. God is not merely saving us from destruction, He is leading us into life. This is the secret embedded in the psalm. Chaos is temporary, but the river is eternal. Wars will end, but the city of God will endure. The mountains will collapse, but His throne will stand. And so, Psalm 46 is not merely about getting through the night. It is about arriving at the dawn of eternity, when God Himself is exalted among the nations and in all the earth. Psalm 46 is not just about survival, it is about destiny. It is about where history is going, where your life is headed, where the river is flowing. And if that is true, then the final question must be asked. What does this destiny mean for us today, here and now? Chapter 10, the final declaration. The psalm ends where it began, but this time, the words are no longer distant theology or ancient poetry. They are battle-tested, fire-forged, storm-proven truth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Do you hear the finality in that declaration? It is not whispered in uncertainty. It is thundered as the last word after chaos has been described, after nations have raged, after wars have been silenced, after God's voice has commanded stillness. This refrain is not repetition, it is revelation. It is the closing seal stamped over the psalm, like a royal decree no power can overturn. A city trembling as enemy armies surround it, voices crying out in fear. And then, above the noise, this proclamation is shouted from the walls. The Lord of hosts is with us. Not the king, not the generals, not the armies, but the Lord of hosts Himself. And not only the God of creation, but the God of Jacob, the God who walks with ordinary, broken people. The personal becomes cosmic, and the cosmic becomes personal. The fortress is not merely in heaven, the fortress is with us. Not far away, not theoretical, but here, present, immediate. This is why the psalmist dares to say, "We will not fear." Because if the Lord of hosts is with us, what force can overthrow us? If the God of Jacob is our refuge, what enemy can breach the walls of our soul? This declaration is more than comfort, it is an apocalypse for the heart. It tears down every false refuge we've built and replaces it with one immovable reality. The soul anchored in God cannot be shaken. Empires collapse, economies fall, bodies weaken, memories fade, but the fortress of God stands forever. And when your life is hidden in Him, so do you. The Apostle Paul echoes this truth in Romans 8. If God is for us, who can be against us? The psalmist said it first, the Lord of hosts is with us. That is not a wish, it is a fact. And facts like this rewrite reality. They become the anthem of the faithful, the song whispered in hospital beds, the refrain sung by exiles, the prayer of the weary who refuse to surrender hope. This verse is not meant to stay on the page. It is meant to live on your lips. Make it your daily anthem. Whisper it into your fears. When anxiety rises in the night, speak it. When headlines shake the nations, declare it. When your own strength fails, lean into it. Say it until it sinks past your mind into your soul. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Do not underestimate the power of repeated truth. The psalmist repeats this refrain because repetition engraves reality into memory. Every time you say it, you are chiseling faith deeper into the stone of your heart. And every time you believe it, you are standing inside the fortress of God. So here at the end of Psalm 46, we are left with a choice. Will we live as though our security depends on fragile kingdoms and failing strength? Or will we anchor our lives in the only fortress that cannot fall? The psalm has shown us the storm, the river, the nations, the wars, the stillness, and now the final declaration. Its message is clear. Everything else shakes, but God remains. Make this verse your anthem. Let it be the words you wake up with, the prayer you carry into the day, the song you fall asleep to. Whisper it into your fears, sing it into your storms, breathe it into your doubts. For when you do, you will discover what I discovered. The fortress of God still stands. And yet, even now, one more mystery lingers. If Psalm 46 hides a prophecy, if its refrain is both comfort and apocalypse, then what about the prayer Jesus himself gave us? The prayer every Christian knows, but few truly understand? What if the Lord's Prayer is not what we think, not just a ritual of words, but a hidden map of destiny? As we close, let us pause and let Psalm 46 speak one last time. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. For those of us in later seasons of life, these words carry a special weight. We have lived long enough to see mountains fall, dreams that crumbled, friends who departed, health that weakened, worlds that changed faster than we could follow. We know the roar of chaos. We know the silence of loss. And yet this psalm tells us, nothing can shake the soul anchored in God. Refuge does not mean we escape trouble. It means we are renewed inside it. Strength is not the pride of youth. It is the quiet resilience that comes from knowing God walks with us. Stillness is not weakness. It is faith that has learned to rest in His hands. So carry this truth with you. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. The same God who ruled over nations still whispers peace into your heart. Let this psalm be your anthem. Speak it daily. Whisper it into the night. For the fortress of God still stands, and within its walls, so will you.